From the Radio Cafe and the Quivira Coalition, this is Down to Earth, the Planet to Plate podcast. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte.
And before we go into our podcast today, here is a message from the Quivira Coalition. We've had a rich and enlightening year. As it comes to a close, we take account of what we've accomplished, what we've learned, and how we will continue to grow in the new year. We hope that as the shortest day of the year approaches, you find yourself peaceful, reflective, grateful, and in the company of friends and family. We appreciate all the ways you engage and participate in our work and community. We couldn't do it without you. In 2019, please drop by the office in Santa Fe, give us a call, send a letter, join us at a workshop, come to the conference, or invite us to the ranch. We love hearing from you. We also hope that as you consider end-of-year giving, you'll keep us in mind or other organizations that caretake these lands we all love. Quivira memberships make a great gift. Thanks for listening to Down to Earth, and we'll see you here next year. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're interested not only in knowing the problems with our current food system, but you also want solutions. Well, today we're going to hear from Reginaldo Haslett-Marroquín of the Mainstreet Project in Northfield, Minnesota. This is a project that is developing solutions to a specific piece of the food system, the poultry industry. And they're doing prototypes that can be scaled. In other words, doing regenerative meat production in a way that provides a model for shifting the entire industry from an unhealthy, wasteful, and really cruel factory model to a healthy, humane, and also profitable model that benefits the animals, the people who work with them, and the ecosystem that they're sitting on, not to mention the consumers who have a chance to eat some really healthy poultry. Born and raised in Guatemala, Reginaldo Haslett-Marroquín has been doing economic development work with indigenous communities for 3 decades, and he's kind of a force of nature. I heard him speak at the Regenerate conference in November, where this podcast was taped, and after I took in and kind of digested his work, I was actually filled with hope that what he's talking about could work. You're going to hear about it now. You decide. Let us know what you think. Meanwhile, Reginaldo, welcome.
Thank you.
So you have become quite well known for doing a project in Minnesota that really is all about not only regenerative farming, but really bringing low-wage workers into a better way of life. Talk about this project, how it got started, what does it do?
Well, the beginning of all of this was finding a way for myself to enter into the food and agriculture systems and infrastructure. And most people might be aware is a really rigidly protected system. It's not easy. Unless you want to play by the rules of the system, it's not really that easy to get into it. So our first question was, how would we make it for somebody coming into this world easy to take steps towards becoming part of this system in a significant way? The first thing I wanted to do in that significant way was, well, if I don't want to labor for the system, I shouldn't have to be limited to that. And so if I don't want to labor, what are my options? And my options were very, very limited. In fact, almost non-existent. The only way I could get into the system was by playing on the edges, like becoming a CSA vegetable farmer or raising a few chickens and selling them on direct, stuff like that, which is not meaningful in terms of system change.
Or becoming a laborer and working very hard for very low wages.
In fact, that's what most people do. So for us, it wasn't about the low-wage laborers necessarily, but it was one of the things we wanted to solve for. So here's the logic. If you design for that larger population and for that sector of the whole food and agriculture system, then you don't discriminate by design against anybody else. Because if you design for that, everybody else has access to it. We have designed to exclude that whole sector. And that's the reason we have such a aggressive, discriminatory, exploitative food and agriculture system. We designed for that. And so because we designed for that, we really locked up everyone in that sector from entering this serious infrastructure and ownership and control and all of that. And so we have technically created a really in-your-face, hidden in plain sight modern slavery system.
When you say we, you mean corporate America.
Yes, but also consumers. I mean, without consumers consuming those products that are so-called cheap food, there is no corporation without consumers. So we, meaning all of us who buy that kind of stuff, and yes, the folks who have capitalized on that consumer lack of awareness and lack of capacity to discern between what's food and what's nutrition and being able to pick accordingly. And when we do that, then we perpetuate that way of structuring how food goes from the fields all the way to our tables. So what we did was we did a national and international analysis of the infrastructure and the pyramidal kind of structure of the food and ag system. And so you take the top and the pyramid is a few companies that own and control almost 100%. So one single company, for example, in the poultry industry controls 75% of all of the poultry that is transacted in the United States. And so the first thing we said was, okay, so there's all these sectors. So you got meat, and you got within meat, you got poultry. So you got poultry, you got turkey, you got chickens, you got eggs. And then another sector of meat, you got pork, you got beef, and so on. And so we started dividing up all of those into individual pyramids. And so at the end, what we had was an assortment of all of the pyramids that form the current food and agriculture system, where on the top of each one of those is a few individuals or companies that control those individual sectors. And on the top of all of them, it's a few companies that control all of the rest of them. On the bottom of all of the pyramids is one of the fundamental ways we subsidize food and ag the way it exists today, which is cheap labor. So when we started designing, we said we're going to design for moving a lot of these individuals into a farming system that actually delivers for them not just jobs, but actually entrepreneurial opportunities. And so in order to do that, and also in order to do it under a regenerative engineering and science and design, we needed to pick one livestock sector, because livestock is central to regenerating landscapes. And so if we went to pick livestock, we also had to pick a livestock that was in most alignment with that foundational, not only labor force, but also small farmers, people coming into the system with no resources, even if they are not laboring for the system. But the key was access, because we modeled it after that sector. We made it massively available to large-scale numbers of people. So if we were to pick a livestock option, the only livestock option that actually meets all of the requirements for a global social revolution behind a food systems change proposition is poultry. And that's where poultry came into the picture for us. And then from there forward, we engineer the units of production and all of the industry infrastructure that we're going to need to redeploy poultry under a regenerative design. So that's how we came to where we are now.
You are from Guatemala, and you are bringing indigenous knowledge and practices into making a completely alternative poultry system. What does that look like?
Think of it this way. Most of what we need to know, we can learn from nature. So in indigenous knowledge, is not too much about knowledge. It's about the wisdom to use what we learn from nature. Knowledge is rarely available. You can Google anything right now. Even indigenous knowledge, you can Google it. That doesn't mean you have the wisdom to use it. What we bring is more than knowledge. It's the wisdom to assemble that knowledge into packages, entrepreneurial processes, business management structures, and all of that, that continually, across the board, respect the fundamental wisdom of what we want at the end of the day. And for us, it was a system that is regenerative. And by that, we mean that in terms of managing energy, which is the foundation of food production, if you think of it this way, we farmers are really just energy managers. What we do is we manage energy from an unedible state in the form of gases in the air, CO2, ammonia, whatever, and nutrients in the soil, and biophysical and chemical processes that puts that energy through a process of transformation, out of which some of it turns into edible crops that we can harvest and eat. Regenerative means that we use natural energy to do all of this. No artificial inputs, none of that. No antibiotics in the case of poultry, none of that. It's completely natural. And that required that we literally think like a chicken. And so if you think like a chicken, one, you don't eat pastures, because gramínea are too high in fiber and too low in protein, so you don't really get the nutrition. In fact, you rob yourself of nutrition if you are going to eat gramíneas.
What are gramíneas?
Gramíneas is grasses. So we started thinking, well, observing the chickens in the outdoors and just letting them loose for the first year or so that we could just watch them and see what their preference was. So we started like really thinking like a chicken, looking at what they were doing, and then we started engineering from there. First thing we learned was that they're jungle fowl. They're jungle animals. They are not open space pasture animals. Second thing is that they preferred animal protein, so bugs and worms and all of that. Third, we learned that after they eliminate all of that, they eat all of that, they continue to demand a high level of protein content in their food. It's one reason we put so much soybean meal into the feed for chickens. So we started looking at the forages that they would prefer. And we found out that they preferred broadleaf forages primarily. And when we analyzed them in the lab, we realized that there was low content of fiber, high content of protein. So consistently, the chicken told us, this is what I want. And I want to be under a canopy. I want to be protected from predators, from the direct sun. If you think like a chicken, the eyes are actually horizontal. They see each way, sideways. They can't look up. They can't look up unless it's cloudy or there's a canopy. And the reason is because they get blinded. They don't have eyelashes and things like that, right? So all of this stuff we brought into the engineering process, and what we ended up with is with this masterpiece of a new, completely redefined and re-engineered way to deploy units of production. Units of production meaning a limited space, a specified space where a whole bunch of elements are put into place so you can grow the best chicken you could ever grow according to how the chicken wants to grow. So that means, in the case of broilers, 1.5 acres. And that 1.5 didn't just come out of thin air. We experimented with ranging patterns, with behavioral patterns, regeneration patterns for the landscape, and then out of that we determined the animal density that we needed to put. We started with 4 paddocks, for example, rotational paddocks. Then we reduced it to 3, and then ended up with 2. And all of that was part of that R&D process. It took us 2 years to get to the point that we said, okay, we got it now. So from there, we went on to scaling. Same thing with the egg layers. In that case, they roam better. They are way more astute, intelligent, because they are not as degenerated as the broilers. And just to point out, we don't use white Cornish industrial broilers. Never did. Probably never will. The broilers, primarily the industrial broilers, are no longer fit to be naturally raised.
Yeah, we did a show on that not too long ago. These Cornish cross hens are so top heavy that they can barely walk and they sort of fall over, and they're very unhealthy chickens, but they reach maturity a lot faster and have a lot of meat.
Yeah, I mean, if what you have is a linear way of thinking, that amount of meat is costing us incredible amounts of money and incredible ecological costs, social costs, and especially health costs, because you can't just blow up an animal like that in that amount of time and expect when you eat it to be healthy as a result. And so the cost of doing that is so great that it's really not worth the benefit that we get out of that. So, we understand that fundamentally.
What kind of chickens do you use?
Well, we're using a slow growth breed, but also we have intensified them so we can grow a lot of chickens. We can grow millions if that's what you need, and do it completely natural. So what we look for is mostly organ development. So even our managerial processes, the agronomics and all of that, feed mixtures and grain mixes, and all of that is actually designed to support the organ development of the animal at an early age. And then as they grow beyond the day 20, day 30, and so on, they have better developed organs, including liver, especially the gizzard, which is where the feed transformation depends on. And so at that point, we can actually raise them for the rest of their days under a slow growth that is much more efficient, because we are not dependent as much on just the feed that comes in buckets and already ground up and all of that. You can't do that with industrial broilers. Their organs just don't develop according to their bodies. And that's why you get what's called the flip over effect, where they get heart attacks very easily. So yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, remember, we are what we eat. So if you don't mind all of those as a consequence of your food on yourself, if you want to be like that, because that's what we end up being at the end of the day, we become what we eat, fine. There's a market that probably won't care about what we grow. But for everybody out there who wants to buy nutrition and to buy health instead of buying stuff that's going to make them sick and just fill them instead of providing them with nutrition, it's fine. We are not here to impose our system. We just know that now there is a lot more demand, a lot more awareness, a lot more customer intelligence coming into place, and we want to be in alignment with that.
What do the chicken paddocks, what do their homes look like? I mean, you talked about canopies, you talked about natural food. What are their days, from the chicken's perspective? What is their home like? What is their day like?
Right. Well, a chicken gets up with daylight and they're hungry, especially if they're broilers. In the case of the egg layers, they're going to want to lay eggs starting early in the morning all the way through past noon. So it depends on which flock you have. If it's broilers, if it's egg layers, the behavior and the management is going to be different. But in a broiler, they get up to 20 days or 25 days. They still get feed and water inside. At day 20 or so, we start feeding them other than ground up feed. What we are doing is bringing them into a diversity of food sources that are not ground up, that allows them to further develop their muscles. We don't want them gaining weight at that point. We want them developing organs and developing the efficiency of those organs to transform energy later on. At that point, we want them healthy, lean, agile animal that is getting ready to start roaming and ranging in the outdoor space. So in the morning, they will get up. There's a coop. There's a shelter because they need to be protected at night. There's a lot of things out there that wants them for dinner too, not just us. And so at night, we make sure that that system is fully protective of them, well ventilated, and so on. Once they reach a certain age, then the outdoor spaces are opened up for them. And those outdoor spaces are divided into two paddocks. Each paddock is roughly 0.75 acres. And then in that paddock, there is either a perennial canopy with trees, different strata. So taller trees, medium trees, understory, and all of them tall enough so that the chickens won't defoliate them. And on the bottom of all of that is where the chickens roam. That ground is now, it got lower temperature, it's got more stable humidity because of the trees. The sun, we shoot for 80% transparency. So you get some sun so you can grow forages under, but not enough that it blinds chickens or keeps them from roaming during a sunny day. Also thick enough so hawks and eagles and all of those predators from the air can't get through. Around each paddock is a fence that keeps all of the ground predators out. This secures that we don't lose chickens to predators, either ground predators or aerial predators. And then in between all of this space under there, with all those conditions, we get high content of organic matter. We can actually grow significant amounts of food for the chicken. And we're not just talking about forages that grow in the soil, but also massive amounts of grain that we bring in that then is sprouted. We don't let it grow. We just sprout it in the ground. And according to our analysis, the amount of nutrition, the multiplication factor of nutrition in those grains is exponential. For example, iron goes from 28 parts per million in corn to 2,800 parts per million. At a point that if you were to put that iron, that kind of amount of iron into the feed mix inside in a confinement animal operation, you probably killed your chickens on contact because it's too high. Yet in a natural form, the way the grain harvests out of the paddock, it actually increases their health, their immunoresistance. We get less sicknesses. When they get sick, they bounce back really fast. We can cure them completely naturally because they got the strength to resist diseases. And so at the end of the day, if we are what we eat, we are transferring all of that to the people who buy these products as well.
Do they eat bugs and worms also?
Yeah, chickens will do that if they are available.
Are they available in your...
Yes, except bugs and worms are not stupid either. So they're not going to come up when the chickens are out there. And those who are fool enough to do that, they will get eaten. We do know that there is massive amounts of worms that develop under the ground. And the reason they do that is because they are right under the surface because the ground doesn't heat up. There's a lot of organic matter. There's a lot of food for the worms because the chickens are defecated. But the symbiosis is really, really mind-blowing because one of the things that happens is that when we rotate the chickens to the paddock that is regenerating, so while one regenerates, we pasture them or we let them forage on one side. So when we move them, that pasture is completely depleted and is expected to regenerate within a week or so.
So you move them every week or so?
We move them according to characteristics, not according to a schedule. So we measure regeneration factors, not time. It's another way of applying really indigenous knowledge to this. It's a part of observation. It's actually conditions that dictate how they are rotated, not a schedule. And then sometimes we have to intervene a little bit to get the place to regenerate faster. For example, if it's not a lot of rain, Then we reduce the density. For example, in the high desert operations in Mexico, where we have another operation, we have a very different protocol for rotation and a different management system, right? But it's the same fundamental blueprint. So, yeah, I mean, the worm population is massive to the extent that within one day after we rotate the chickens to the other paddocks, there's no manure left. You can walk in there and you can't find a dropping. And the reason is because all of that manure is incredible food that then these worms bring into the ground and make it available to the canopy trees that we are growing in there. In our case, the canopy is also built with highly productive, economically very valuable species like hazelnuts, like olive trees in Mexico, like sugar maples in Minnesota, and hazelnuts and elderberries and all of that, and fruit trees in other places. In Guatemala, for example, the canopies are built with orange trees, avocados, 200 feet tall trees like Ramon that produces very valuable fruits and nuts that then can be turned back into poultry feed if we want to. All kinds of things like that. So at the end of the day, what we have is a fully functioning three-dimensional energy transformation infrastructure at the end of the day.
So you've got these trees that are not only providing shade for the chickens, they're also providing food for the chickens or crops that you can sell.
Yes, I mean, in Minnesota, for example, one hazelnut bush is producing us 2.5 pounds of in-shell clean nuts. Now, we can put up, in the case of meat birds in the 1.5 acres, we put up to 1,000 of those trees. That means, 2,500 pounds of hazelnuts that the chickens are fertilizing, weeding, and supporting. That's just the understory. We still got to count all of the upper stories, up to 7 stories that we can put in there. All the way from timber to firewood to food for other animals. Like we could rotate pork into this 5 years into the poultry. The system is mature enough that we can rotate pork on the day after we rotate chickens, because they will till up, they will turn up the soil and all of that. They will bury the seeds that we want to germinate for the poultry to come back into, and also eat bugs that the chickens may not eat because they are digging up. The chickens don't dig. All of that is part of the system. We start with the chickens. Poultry-centered regenerative engineering is not about chickens. It's about regenerative engineering of production units. And that is fully integrated, not just the trees, the protection from predators, all of that. For example, we have migratory birds now that have been nesting on our hazelnut trees. So we got this dilemma. Do we harvest by machine and destroy all of that nesting ground, or we harvest by hand and allow for that diversity to continue to thrive? Those are now more regenerative considerations. We didn't think we're going to have to, but now because we really go after the indigenous way of managing resources, natural resources, we seriously think about that.
In all of this, what is the human labor part of it?
Well, one of the things we always said, and I have a book out, it's called In the Shadow of Green Men. You can buy it out of Acres USA or Amazon. I recommend Acres USA.
AcresUSA.com.
Yes. So in that book, I start by explaining that we are allergic to work. Work isn't really attractive. And so if we could wave a magic wand, that's the way we would raise this poultry. We can't do that, so we go as close as possible. So the labor is really managing the paddocks, closing and opening the chicken doors, feeding them, cleaning up the waters, putting the natural medicinal compounds that we put into the water system, those kinds of things. Then harvesting at the end. In average, we're talking about 100 hours in average per flock, up to 80 days. When we grow for markets that want the chickens smaller, like 60 days, then that labor goes down. But in total, I would say on a daily basis for a flock, nobody's spending more than 1.5 hours a day. And especially, nobody's lifting stuff and dragging across fields or any of that labor-intensive stuff.
So you don't need that many laborers in order to make this work?
Well, we need a lot more than confinement feeding operation, of course, because those are, you can mechanize a lot more things, but we can still mechanize feeding. We can still mechanize watering. The only things we can't mechanize is harvesting the hazelnuts, is letting the chickens out, although that may be partially mechanizable because we found a system that will open up the doors for them to go out in the morning with daylight, and then they will shut them down after it gets dark. And so even that can be partially mechanized. We still need, though, 1.5 hours per unit a day of a person. And then every other week, at least 2 to 3 hours to manage the paddocks. And so at the end, you get about 100 hours per flock. So the way we structure is we calculate, well, if a person wants to be full-time on the farm working with our system, we can put them into 4, 5, or 6, up to 8 production units. And that will give them a regular work day. But 8 production units will produce you between 32,000 to 35 up to 40,000 chickens. And that's enough, combined with all of the other resources that the system produces, and also including the manure that allows you to fertilize large production outside of the poultry system, which allows you to produce vegetables and other things that are also economically valuable and now are done in a way that don't require outside inputs because you already have them coming out of the poultry system. That represents a full farm, and that could be, as small as 15 acres for a full family to operate, plus a little bit of help here and there. One of the things we're trying to do is set up clusters of farms so that we can mechanize some of the things outside of the direct poultry care, such as landscape management. So we're trying to isolate each enterprise sector. So landscape management, for example, we can bring crews that will come and manage your landscape outside of the paddocks, fences, all of that, maintain that so the farmer doesn't have to invest in mowers and weed whackers and time doing that. And a specialized team can come and do it in a third of the time that it would take the farmer, which means less expensive. And now you create another enterprise sector. Same thing with feed. We integrating all of this vertically so that the system manages all of the parts involved with deploying the system at scale. So as long as we have them within geographically defined target areas, we can incorporate up to 14 different enterprise sectors that all are symbiotically connected to the poultry, including nuts, hazelnut processing facilities and all of that, which for us is part of the poultry system. It's kind of stretching the mind here.
Yeah.
But that's how it works. Systems level engineering works that way, especially when I'm talking about regenerative, because the word regenerative really is connected to a way of thinking and a way of doing things. It's not fitted for labeling things. It's fitted for the way we think and manage farms. So for us, regenerative is a way of doing things and thinking about that. Whether we label our system regenerative or not, certified or whatever, that's so far down in importance.
Well, my understanding is that regenerative basically means leaving the land better off than it was before.
Well, I would say is ensuring that as a whole, your system produces net energy, which is also returned back to the system, the ecosystem, not just to the land, not just to the soil, but the whole ecosystem. So for example, we're turning all of this feed into eggs and meat, but also into cellulose structures in the form of tree trunks and all of that, into leaves that actually are capturing the nutrients below the ground, putting them into more molecularly stable and slow release forms in the form of leaves that then fall down and to the surface, which then the chickens rustle on, defecate on, which then the worms grab and put them back into a system. At the end, what we're doing is harvesting between 20 and 30% of all of the energy we are capturing out of the air especially. And then the 70% that is left goes back into regenerating the ecosystem. That's what regenerative agriculture is about. It's not about whether you use toxic chemicals or not. It's whether you are managing energy efficiently to get these kinds of outputs that are critical for feeding the world.
One of the things that's so fascinating to me about your work is that you were using the processes and language of regenerative agriculture and indigenous wisdom, as you say, but are also very much of an industrial organization. And it's usually when we're thinking about industrial agriculture versus regenerative agriculture, somehow you're managing to do both and think in both ways at the same time.
Let me put it this way. We have to feed the world. And the only way to do that is to deploy systems at scale. So if a regenerative concept cannot be deployed at scale, we're not going to feed the world. Because fundamentally, the system we have today already failed at feeding the world. It's already a history. There's no argument anymore as to how many people are hungry because the current system can't deliver, either because of ownership and control, which defines distribution and all of that, or because of waste that is created that is actually becoming toxic to the land and to us. That waste is unnecessary because what the industrial system produces as waste in regenerative agriculture is just energy that becomes part of a new cycle. See, that's the foundational difference. So I'm not here to argue whether we can feed the world or not. I'm here to say we can do it, and we can do it completely without destroying the ecologies that we depend on to feed the world to begin with. We can do it without polluting water, soil, or any of that. In fact, we shouldn't pollute water and soil when we're actually using efficiently all the energy we're putting into the system. When we get pollution out of agriculture, that means we are inefficiently managing energy. That system is fundamentally unstable because it turns valuable energy, which costs us money as a society and as farmers, as consumers, and turning it into a toxic thing that destroys other ecosystems on which we also depend. So it really is a massive degeneration ripple effect that is generated by doing conventional agriculture. That is not the way you feed the world. You feed the world by capturing all of this massive energy, putting it into edible products that are highly nutritious and in terms of nutritional value actually less expensive than what we call cheap food. Let's remember that, for a conventionally produced head of lettuce or apple to meet the nutritional characteristics of a regenerative produced apple or lettuce, you need 2 or 3 times more volume to be able to get to the same place. So we're going to talk about price of food and competitiveness out there. If we actually talk about nutrition, our nutrition is less expensive than the fill that we buy at the store today, and we call it cheap. That is the way to feed the world. The other way, we can fill the world, but we'll never nourish the world.
Very interesting. The kind of model that you were talking about, I guess, started in Minnesota, but you're also doing it now in lots of other places. Talk about how this work is spreading.
Yeah, well, our concept started hundreds of years ago. My ancestors knew this stuff. I learned it as a child. I also learned it because I wanted to learn it. Doesn't mean every kid growing up with me figured this out either. But it started there. The multiplicity of canopies, the three-dimensional nature of agriculture and all of that. Learning as a child, went to school, studied conventional agriculture and all of that, science and technology and so on. And then we materialized all of that combination of industrial level design and engineering with ancestral regenerative ways of thinking, and we deployed the first prototype unit out of Minnesota. The very first one was done before we formally started doing this work here. The first unit that we are using now, the first formal unit, is at my small space in Northfield, Minnesota. It's a 0.6 acre production unit that is the most mature. Then we started building other farms around. We just purchased last year 100 acres where we are deploying the first farm size demonstration, prototype, and training and educational center.
Where's that?
In Northfield, Minnesota. And as we started doing that, we also started getting calls from other places. So even before we finished that, we started a process in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, and we have a much larger operation there now. We also started developing in partnership with the Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation out of Pine Ridge, South Dakota. They are also producing already. At the same time we were doing those 3 sites, we started the Guatemalan project. We are launching the first training farm and demonstration farm together with Regeneration Guatemala, which is a large-scale network of industry leaders and organizers that are putting together the system there. After that, we'll go to Belize. We're going to be launching Regeneration Belize. And then we have been parallel to all of those working with Meade, Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, the Winnebago people out of Nebraska, Fairfield, Iowa, and we are now deploying 2 scoping missions in Indiana and 1 in Ohio and 1 in New Hampshire. So this is right now the coverage. There's about 75 people directly involved now in deploying our system in different stages. 7 of us are actually based out of Northfield, Minnesota. The rest are on their own. And there's about 150 people who are directly associated with those individuals directly involved with us. The ecosystem overall, we are talking about in excess of 7,000 people or maybe 10,000 that are now either indirectly connected or directly connected, like those 75 that are actually seeing to that this system gets deployed in different parts.
You mentioned some Native American people who are doing these projects. Do you see any kind of recognition of their own indigenous traditions in recognizing your work of these projects?
You asked the magical question because that's the magic of this system. It's very easy to have a conversation across the board, whether it's somebody in Africa, in Russia. We have had Russians, Chinese, Guatemalan indigenous, Lakota, Dakota, Cheyenne, you name them. We have had conversations, and it's almost an instant connection because we speak the same language. Even though we're not speaking the same technology and the same objectives, very quickly we can align those things. So right now we are creating the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance to bring together folks who are working, for example, on bison, but need some quick protein solutions to the communities. So we can do that transitional process with the poultry while they develop the more permanent regenerative, more culturally adapted systems. Our poultry system is going to be a bridge for a lot of these communities to reclaim some of their ancestral rights to food sovereignty and all of that. So yes, this is actually the most exciting part of what I'm doing, is the fact that we can actually change the world. See, the thing is, we think that we need to change the ecology and the economics and all of that, and most people gravitate to that as the beginning point. That's a misguided thing. See, the thing is, people is what's destroying the world, and it is us people who are going to fix it. And guess what? Over 20% of the total land mass of the world is covered by over 370 million indigenous peoples. And guess who have been actually keeping the knowledge that can save us? Is the indigenous communities. So this is a true social revolution that we can ignite just with doing poultry right. Because as we do that right, all of the other sectors start falling into alignment. And especially those sectors that can be reclaimed to the rightful people of a lot of places. And the rest of the world can be fed properly, nourished properly, and we can preserve and enhance our ecosystems. I mean, even if we didn't have climate problems today, even if we didn't have any problems today with all of these sectors, which, by the way, we have, and that's one of the main reasons we have to change. But see, we never had to go there. We could be perfectly feeding the whole world already without having ever caused those problems. So the least we can do is give the chance to those who always knew this and have preserved the knowledge to actually solve these problems.
When you talk about these poultry systems and you can bring a basic system that you've developed to all these different new places, how much do they differ from one geographical location to another based on the ecosystems and the traditions of those new places?
Yeah, so they do vary quite a bit. There are some kind of non-negotiable fundamentals that are part of the standard, and they are global. So for example, the square footage of a chicken inside a building, the amount of linear inches of feeding, purchase, nesting, water, all of that is going to be the same because the chickens fundamentally have this standard size that they grow into. Now, the breed, for example, can change based on what's available and what's native to a region and what's acceptable to that market. Also, is critical for the resiliency of the species. So we don't want to just bring a single breed into all parts where we go. The other thing is the perennial production outdoors is structured according to the native species in that specific region. For example, in Guatemala, like I was describing, we're putting, pacaya is a native species that grows in the rainforest, but is tall enough and nitrogen demanding enough that it does really well with poultry, but produces really valuable food and is ancient.
What is it, a fruit tree?
No, it's a palm-like plant that produces a flower, and the flower is what people eat. So it's like our version of vegetables, except we don't have to destroy the ecology to produce our vegetables. See, flowers are leaves in different colors, and some of them are way more nutritious than actual lettuce and spinach and all of that. So for us, regenerative vegetables are kind of an oxymoron if you have to destroy the ecology to produce that. Well, in most of the ecologies in the rainforest and the tropicals, we don't have to destroy the ecology to produce the same nutrition that lettuce and spinach and all of that produces. And that's what we are seeking in those ecologies. So yes, that unit in the northern rainforest and other places in Latin America where it's more tropical are going to look very different in terms of outdoor management than the ones in San Miguel de Allende, which is a high desert. So it will be the same around here, this region in the southwest. In Minnesota, those paddocks are populated by elderberries, hazelnuts, oaks, sugar maples, basswood in the place where we are based because we are in this big woods ecosystem, which is not for the whole center of the United States either. In other parts, we got to adapt to those conditions. But at the end of the day, you get the same consistent quality of meat, eggs, and a standardized process by which we deploy these different blueprints.
How long does it take to get an operation up and running from the beginning in each new place that you do it?
Well, let's assume you already got the capital and you already got the land. From that point, if you already got the capital to move forward with the land and all of that, 3 months maximum, you could have an operation deployed. From there, you get a waiting time in the case of meat birds between 60 and 80 days to get the first harvest. In the case of egg layers, you got 6 months.
But 3 months, I mean, don't you have to grow trees and bushes and all that stuff? Are you
Well,
going to
good
places
point.
where you have them?
Yes, so you could start with an established forest, but you don't have to. See, the key is canopy. Now, the canopy can be made up of annual crops. So, for example, in San Miguel de Allende, in Northfield, Minnesota, now we got canopies that are perennial, whether it's mulberries and olive trees and other species in San Miguel, or whether it's hazelnuts and oaks and sugar maples in Minnesota, and black walnuts and other kinds of nut trees, which are also really compatible with the poultry manure. Before we have those things, we can plant corn, we can plant sorghum, we can plant sunflowers, and we can feed it back to the chickens while the plants provide the canopy and the chickens weed and fertilize them. We have that through every step of every process that we need to undergo in almost any ecology in the world up to now. And then every place is going to have solutions like that. In terms of social conditions, that's definitely critical. So we have a triangle-like tool that we use where we place economics on one corner, social on the other, and ecological on the other. And then we have a grading system where we give values from 1 to 10 to all of the economic, social, and ecological options for an area. Whether it's native species, for example, we'll get a 10. If you say, well, let's put hazelnuts into the system, well, that gets a 10 because it's native to Minnesota. Let's say you are in Guatemala and you want to put avocados in your canopy. Okay, so is it native? No. So if it's not native, has it adapted for a few generations? Yes. Okay, if that's the case, then maybe it gets a 5. If it's very valuable, let's say that it's a new species, hasn't been there, but will grow. Say you want to do regenerative palm oil, which is doable, but you can't deploy it as a single species, a monoculture. You got to incorporate it with a whole ecosystem and all of that. Say we want to do that. You want to start with that, but you want to start in northern Guatemala. Well, palm oil is not native, but it would do well if it's put into an ecosystem. It gets a 0 in terms of ecological value because it really doesn't belong in there, but it may get a 10 in economic value. And it may make a 5 in social value. And so you put all of the options that the native community can throw at you, and then you grade them. And at the end, what you have is a top, say, 10 species that have the highest ecological value because of all of that grading. And now you got a blueprint for what you're going to do with that, in terms of which ones balance the economic, social, and ecological. And that allows you to make really quick, yet native-based, community-informed, very sophisticated decisions that don't conflict with any of the regenerative principles we have set forth.
What are the social values and how do you grade them?
For example, if we want to put avocados in a space, we did this exercise, by the way, with an indigenous community in northwestern Guatemala. So we said, do everybody eat avocados? And yeah, everybody raised their hands. Would everybody plant them? And everybody raised their hands. Do you feel comfortable marketing them, bringing them to the market? Would the market buy them? See, those are 3 fundamental social values. And so we grade those based on how many hands went up. So we had a pretty large group of people there. And so you can actually grade it based on how many agree and disagree. And it's very, very representative. It's very democratic, very representative, and legitimately gives you a good assessment of whether there's a market or not and whether people accept what you're going to try to do. That would be a social analysis, for example. Economically, we got to look at what they sell for, what they cost to raise, is there a profit margin, all of those things. And what does it take to transport them? What's the lifespan? Is it perishable? Is there a lot of risk because of perishability? All those aspects go into the economics. And then on the ecological, again, is it native? Is it adapted? And so on. And at the end, you get an average weighted value, and you can make a really good, well-sophisticated decision without compromising on anything.
How many people can make a decent living at each operation?
Well, if you're in Guatemala, a lot more people than if you're in Minnesota. Exactly what number is really going to change. That's for communities to decide. In some places, you got such community profit sharing culture and sharing of work and all of that, that you can involve 200, 300, 6,000 people in a regional cluster. and do the same amount of production units that 250 people in Minnesota will manage, for example. So the same exact size of operation could engage 10 times more people in the rural community in Guatemala, where people are earning $2, $3 a day, and $10 is actually winning the lottery, versus somebody who is in Minnesota in an economy that doesn't allow for small increments like that as easily, right? So some things that we mechanize in Minnesota, like feeding and watering, you'll never do that in Guatemala because people are perfectly ready to just do it themselves.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not called inefficiency. That's actually called efficiency of use of resources. And we get this wrong. We think that just because we're not using machines, we're inefficient. It's just so frustrating. So frustrating to hear that being said, but folks that are supposed to be professionals and better thinkers.
If somebody's listening right now and they want to start a project like this, how do they go about it?
Well, first of all, they need to get training. So they need to get in touch with our local operations, with our local anchor partners, and all of that. And if there isn't one, we just simply can't help them. As engineers and as part of the core team in Minnesota, we can't go around the world. We have to deploy the local teams. So that's why we have 75 people already directly engaged, because we got a team on each one of those places we're talking about. So the first thing a farmer will do is line up and get in line with the local deployment. We don't train farmers unless we're already building a market. So it's completely market driven. So we're not going to train 1,000 farmers and then hang them out to dry, unless they just want to be trained and they don't expect to be part of the system. They just want to do it for their own food security and all of that, which is also happening. But if we're going to engage them, we want them to be part of the brands, want to be part of the system, because that's how we distribute the ownership and control. So we could train a farmer who's going to be part of the system, and they come in, they get screened, we place them within the targeted areas. We're very strategic about all of that because of footprint and all of that, carbon footprint that we got to watch for. So we don't want to be transporting products unnecessarily, producing more than we can sell, any of those things. So we got to manage that. If a farmer wants to just learn and do this on their own and doesn't really care whether they become part of the system or not, they will get the training too. If we have the ability to do that for free, we will. Most of the time we can't, so that either they will have to pay for the training, or we find a funder that is willing to fund us so we can pay the cost without charging the farmer, and they can go back and secure the food for their communities. Those are the two ways people can come in.
Where do you sell the products?
Right now, in the places where we got production, Pine Ridge, for example, they are selling it within the Pine Ridge Reservation. It's mostly about food sovereignty. In Minnesota, where we got more production, we're selling to just regular companies, colleges, universities, restaurants, food co-ops. Just recently, we started setting up national accounts, and so we'll be setting up production in other sites, supplying them from where our center right now, but then setting them up closer to those markets.
What are your hopes for this work?
My hope is that we can completely transform the poultry industry as an entry level to transforming the world of food, one chicken at a time, literally. If we win at one of these industries and we can change one industry, the rest of them are going to be downhill, especially if we can change the poultry. It's one of the most entrenched, the most abusive of people, the most disruptive of our our ecology and all of that. And it's one of the most vertically integrated, vertically owned and controlled. And because of that, it has become a real problem for our society and our ability to actually keep the world livable. And so if we can win at one of those sectors, especially at the size and scope of the poultry industry, we can actually set up a blueprint for industrial level systemic change that is almost, for most folks right now, it's impossible to even conceptualize. Now, if we could conceptualize this and get it done just the same way, remember, nothing exists without first living in somebody's mind. Whether it's the poultry, the cattle, confinement operations, whether it's the buildings, whether it's roads or oil, all of those industries were first designed by people and then implemented. That's what we are trying to do here. And if the market allows us, the investors come along, and the farmers come along, if we can ignite that level of creativity across the board and change this sector on the same blueprint, we can change all of the other sectors. That's my hope. And my immediate hope is that, at least in the markets where we are, we will to get the farmers, the markets, the intermediary operations, processing and so on, and distribution, and that our brand, the Tree Range brand, becomes the next big thing in this country. And that as we do that, we move into a space where communities of farmers and consumers can own and control a more significant part of the poultry market share.
Are the mainstream poultry companies aware of you? Are they feeling threatened at all? Do you have any sense of that?
No, I really have never paid attention to that. They must be aware. I'm speaking all over the place, and I'm pretty open about it. Unless they don't want to hear about us, they haven't. But
I mean, your goal is to essentially put them out of business.
no, not at all. Not at all. We welcome their investments. We welcome for them to transition. We want them to be with us if they want to. We can't force them. We can't force feed them this system. It is up to them to do that, but not at all. We are not against anybody, against anything. We are here to build an alternative way for all of us to do well. That's what we are doing here. We're not against them. We're not here to say what they're doing is wrong by attacking them that way. No, not at all. We are saying that what they do has consequences that are severe for our society, our ecology, and our economics. Yes, absolutely. But that's the result of how things are run. And so we got to expose that, of course. But it's not because we are accusing these individuals or these corporations of not wanting to do something different. That's for them to decide. If they do want to do something different, we're welcoming everyone. What we will not do is whitewash what we're doing. What we won't do is be utilized to enhance traditional linear ways of thinking by taking some of our claims into that space. And I know some of that is going to happen anyway. It's already happening. And so the integrity of our system for us is critical. That part we won't negotiate. But everybody's welcome into that space.
Reginaldo Haslett-Marroquín is with the Mainstreet Project in Northfield, Minnesota. They are on the web at mainstreetproject.org. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
This podcast was recorded at the Regenerate conference in Albuquerque last month. Please follow the Quivira Coalition on social media or on their website to find out more about past and future conferences. They're quite amazing. And before we go, one more thing, very important. We are excited to announce a new collaboration between the Quivira Coalition, Pasture Map, and the Grass-Fed Exchange to bring you the Regeneration Rising podcast. It features conversations between young agrarians and their mentors about the challenges and joys of life in agriculture. The relationships next-generation farmers and ranchers develop with their veteran counterparts are critical for equipping young agrarians to build thriving ecosystems and an abundant future. Go to regenerationrising.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts for the first episode, which is airing the day after Christmas, December 26th.
You've been listening to Down to Earth, a production of the Quivira Coalition and the Radio Cafe. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte. If you like this program, please share it with your network. And we'd love your feedback. Go to downtoearth.media, where you can contact us and you can sign up for the mailing list. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. We're producing this show bi-weekly and would love your comments and ideas. So once again, downtoearth.media. And check out the Quivira Coalition, quiviracoalition.org. That's Quivira. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.